He left the world of power and politics to sell fries on a quiet street corner. But why would a man with everything trade it all for a fryer? And what dark family secret is he running from? The lights were bright, blinding almost. Cameras flashed from every direction. The crowd outside the courthouse was a sea of faces, some mocking, some curious, but most angry. The once unshakable Donald J. Trump, former president of the United States, was walking down the steps, flanked by a group of lawyers who looked just as exhausted as he felt. Reporters shoved microphones in his face, shouting questions. "Mr. Trump, how does it feel to lose everything? Is it true your last business venture went bankrupt? Any comment on your family distancing themselves?" Trump tried to keep his expression calm and controlled, but inside he was crumbling. For years he had thrived on power, applause, and the aura of invincibility. Now it was all gone. The business empire that once bore his name had collapsed under the weight of scandals and lawsuits. Financial backers pulled out. Buildings with the Trump name were rebranded overnight, severing ties to a brand that had become synonymous with failure. Even his family, the people he once believed would stand by him no matter what, had distanced themselves. Ivanka hadn't answered his calls in months. Don Jr. and Eric seemed to be living their own lives, far away from the chaos that surrounded their father. Barron was off at school, and Melania had retreated into her own quiet world. The media circus didn't help. Late-night hosts turned his name into punchlines. Social media was flooded with memes mocking his downfall. The man who had once demanded attention at every turn was now the object of ridicule and pity. "Get in the car," his lead lawyer, Mark, whispered urgently, trying to guide Trump through the crowd. Trump stopped in his tracks, ignoring Mark's protests. He looked at the faces around him. Is this what it all comes down to? He thought. The boos were louder than anything he'd heard before. A young woman held up a sign that read, "Not so golden now, are you?" It stung. Finally, he climbed into the back seat of the black sedan. The door slammed shut, muffling the noise of the crowd outside. For a moment, there was silence. Trump stared out the window as the car pulled away, the cheers and jeers fading into the background. "This isn't the end," he muttered under his breath, though even he wasn't sure he believed it. The apartment was a far cry from Trump Tower. It was modest. 2 small bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, and furniture that looked like it came from a discount store. The wallpaper was peeling in places, and the carpet had seen better days. The windows overlooked a noisy street corner in Queens, a stark reminder of how far he had fallen. Trump sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at a stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table. His once signature red tie was loosened around his neck, and he looked unkempt, something rare for him. His hair, once perfectly styled, was slightly out of place, and his suit hung awkwardly on him like it belonged to someone else. He reached for the remote, flipping through the channels. It didn't take long to land on a news station. There he was, splashed across the screen. A photo of him leaving the courthouse, surrounded by a flurry of headlines about his bankruptcy and lawsuits. Turning it off, he let out a frustrated groan and leaned back in his chair. His mind wandered to the days of Mar-a-Lago, gold-plated rooms, and the unwavering confidence that he could handle anything life threw his way. Now he could barely keep the lights on. The loneliness hit hardest at night. He thought about calling Ivanka. Maybe if he apologized, truly apologized, she'd pick up. But as he scrolled through his contacts, his finger hovering over her name, doubt crept in. What could he say? Where would he even start? Instead, he set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. "Is this it?" he muttered aloud. "This is what it all comes to? A pathetic apartment, and no one left to care." The thought lingered, gnawing at him. For the first time in decades, he felt small, powerless, forgotten. The idea of working didn't come to him right away. At first, he considered trying to rebuild another business, perhaps a small real estate project or an online venture. But every call he made, every email he sent, was met with polite refusals. Then one afternoon, while wandering through the streets of Queens, he stumbled upon it. A small, dingy fry stand on the corner of a busy street. The sign above it read "Queens Fries" in faded red letters. The paint was chipping, and the stand looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Behind the counter, an elderly man shuffled around, his hands shaking slightly as he handed a paper bag to a customer. Trump stood there for a moment, watching. Something about the place intrigued him. He walked up to the stand, clearing his throat to get the man's attention. "Hey," Trump said. "What's the deal with this place? It looks run down." The man, who introduced himself as Sal, chuckled. "That's one way to put it. This place has been in my family for 40 years, but I'm getting too old to keep it running. You interested?" Trump frowned, taken aback. "Me? Run a fry stand? Do I look like a fry cook to you?" Sal shrugged. "Couldn't hurt to try. You'd be surprised what a place like this can do for someone." Trump opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated. The idea was ridiculous, absurd even. But as he looked around, he realized he didn't have many options. "How much are you selling it for?" he asked finally, his voice laced with skepticism. Sal named a number that was low enough for Trump's dwindling bank account to manage. Trump paused, thinking. This wasn't how he envisioned his comeback. But maybe, just maybe, it could be the start of something. "Fine," he said with a sigh. "I'll take it." Sal smiled, handing him a set of keys. "Good luck, kid. You're gonna need it." Trump stared at the fry stand, feeling a strange mixture of dread and determination. How hard can selling fries be, he thought. Little did he know, the answer was about to surprise him. The sun was just beginning to rise when Donald Trump unlocked the fry stand for the first time. The air was crisp, and the streets were quiet, save for the occasional rumble of a delivery truck. He stared at the tiny metal structure, painted in shades of dull gray and faded red, and felt a pang of disbelief. "This is my life now?" he thought. Inside, the smell of old grease lingered. A rusty fryer sat in the corner, and shelves stocked with packets of salt and ketchup were coated in a fine layer of dust. The cash register was ancient, its buttons worn from years of use. It beeped loudly when he pressed one, startling him. "Great start," he muttered sarcastically, donning the plain white apron that Sal had left behind. He spent the first hour reading the operating instructions, handwritten in a dog-eared notebook left by Sal. The scrawled notes weren't exactly helpful. "Turn on fryer. Watch for smoke." He frowned. Watch for smoke? That doesn't sound promising. Finally, a customer approached, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap and hoodie. "Morning, you open yet?" the man asked, leaning casually on the counter. Trump straightened up, trying to look professional. "Of course I'm open," he said confidently. "What'll it be?" The man grinned. "Just a small fries to start the day." Trump nodded and turned to the fryer, struggling to remember the steps he'd just read. He poured a bag of frozen fries into the basket and lowered it into the bubbling oil. Steam hissed, and a splash of hot grease landed on his hand. "Ow!" Trump yelped, shaking his hand furiously. "You okay over there?" the customer asked, half laughing. "Never better," Trump said, gritting his teeth. After a few minutes, he pulled the fries out, shaking the basket vigorously. Some spilled onto the counter. He cursed under his breath before tossing the rest into a grease-stained paper bag. "Here," he said, handing over the fries. The customer took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. His eyes widened slightly. Not bad. Could use a little salt, though." Trump blinked. "Salt? Of course I meant to do that." He grabbed a salt packet and handed it over. The man gave him a nod of approval and walked off, leaving Trump staring after him. First sale down. Only 1,000,000 more to go, he thought. The day dragged on. More customers came, some out of curiosity, others just looking for a cheap bite. Most recognized him instantly. "Aren't you?" one woman asked, squinting as she handed him a $5 bill. Trump gave a tight smile. Yes, it's me." "Didn't you used to be like a billionaire?" she said, tilting her head. He clenched his jaw, counting out her change. "Things change." By mid-afternoon, the fry stand was bustling. Trump struggled to keep up, his hands greasy, his shirt stained with ketchup after a packet exploded in his hands. The fryer beeped drills every few minutes and the cash register jammed twice. A small line began forming, and people in the back started muttering impatiently. "Hey, buddy, you gonna hurry it up?" a man shouted. Trump turned, gripping the counter. "Why don't you come back here and try it yourself, huh?" He snapped, his frustration boiling over. The line went quiet for a moment before someone laughed. "Man, this guy really has fallen." The comment stung, but Trump bit his tongue and went back to work. As the day wound down, Trump slumped onto the small stool behind the counter. His feet ached, his hands were sticky, and his hair was slightly askew. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the street, and the last of his customers walked away, fries in hand. He gazed out at the quieting street, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and accomplishment. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't easy, but he'd made it through the day. Maybe this isn't so bad, he thought, though he wasn't quite convinced. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the counter. He looked up to see an elderly woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "You're still open, right?" she asked, clutching a small coin purse. Yes," Trump said, standing up. "What can I get you?" "Just a small fries, dear," she said. As he prepared her order, she leaned on the counter. "You know, I saw the news. A lot of people are making fun of you. But it takes real guts to start over like this." He paused, looking at her. No one had said anything remotely encouraging to him in months. He handed her the fries, his voice softer than usual. "Thank you. That means a lot." She smiled and walked away, leaving Trump alone again. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Trump closed up the stand, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Small, fragile, and uncertain, but hope nonetheless. It didn't take long for Donald Trump to realize that the fry stand wasn't just a place to sell food. It was a crossroads of people from all walks of life. Every day brought someone new to his counter, and each interaction pushed him further out of his comfort zone. One crisp morning, he opened the stand and found himself staring at a line of early risers, a few of whom he was beginning to recognize. Among them was Maria, an older woman who had become one of his most frequent customers. With her short snow-white hair neatly pinned back and a cane that she used more for balance than necessity, Maria carried herself with an air of quiet dignity. "Good morning, Maria," Trump greeted, trying his best to sound cheerful. He was still working on softening his usual tone, which often came off sharper than intended. "Morning, Mr. Trump," she said with a warm smile. "I'll take my usual." He nodded, scooping a small batch of fries into a paper bag. As he handed them over, Maria gave him a knowing look. "You seem less flustered today," she said, her sharp eyes observing every detail. "I'm getting the hang of it," he admitted. "And you keep showing up. So I must be doing something right." Maria chuckled. "We're creatures of habit, dear. Plus, I think you're starting to like this place more than you let on." He didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on wiping down the counter. After she left, the next customer approached, a tall, lanky young man who introduced himself as Jamal. "Yo, you hiring?" Jamal asked, resting his elbows on the counter. He had dark circles under his eyes and a weary but hopeful expression. Trump arched an eyebrow. "I can barely pay myself. What makes you think I can afford an employee?" Jamal shrugged. "Figured it wouldn't hurt to ask. I got 2 jobs already, but I'm trying to save up to move my mom out of her place. It's falling apart." Trump paused, studying the young man. There was a determination in Jamal's voice that struck a chord with him. For a moment, he saw a reflection of his younger self, ambitious, hungry, and desperate to prove something. "Maybe someday," Trump said. "But for now, I can give you some fries on the house." Jamal grinned. "Appreciate it, man. Let me know if you change your mind about hiring." As the day wore on, more locals stopped by. There was Mrs. Peterson, a retired schoolteacher who always brought a crossword puzzle with her while waiting for her order. She was polite and sweet, but not afraid to point out when the fries were too salty or the counter wasn't clean enough. "You could learn a thing or two about attention to detail, young man," she teased one afternoon, wagging her finger at him. "Young man?" Trump smirked, feeling oddly flattered by the comment. "I'll take that as a compliment." Each interaction chipped away at the walls he had spent years building around himself. These people weren't political allies or business associates. They were just people, ordinary, flawed, struggling, and, in their own way, kind. One evening, as the day wound down, a disheveled man approached the fry stand. His clothes were torn, his face weathered from years spent on the streets. He was holding a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless vet, anything helps." Trump hesitated, unsure of what to say or do. The man glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he seemed to recognize Trump. "Well, look who it is," the man said, his voice rough but steady. "Mr. Billionaire himself. Fancy seeing you here." Trump straightened his posture. "Do you want some fries or not?" The man laughed bitterly. "Sure, why not?" Fries seemed like the perfect metaphor for life, greasy, unhealthy, and gone in a flash. As Trump prepared the fries, the man continued speaking, his tone dripping with disdain. "You know, people like you never had to struggle a day in your life. You've had everything handed to you. Bet this little fry stand is just a game to you, a way to pass the time until you bounce back to your big mansions and private jets." Trump froze for a moment, the man's words cutting deeper than he expected. He finished preparing the order and handed the fries over without a word. The man looked at the bag, then back at Trump. "What? No comeback? No speech about how you've changed?" Trump leaned on the counter, his gaze steady. "Enjoy the fries." The man studied him for a moment, his expression softening slightly before he turned and walked away. That night, Trump sat alone in his tiny apartment, replaying the encounter in his mind. The man's words gnawed at him. He thought about all the times he had looked down on people, assuming he was better because of his wealth or status. Now, here he was, trying to survive like everyone else. For the first time in his life, he began to wonder if his downfall wasn't just a punishment, but an opportunity, a chance to see the world through different eyes. It was late. The city outside was buzzing with the soft hum of evening life. But Donald Trump sat alone at the tiny kitchen table in his cramped apartment. The single bulb above him cast a harsh light on the crumpled notebook page in front of him. Next to it sat his untouched dinner, instant noodles cooling rapidly in a chipped bowl. He scribbled a word and immediately crossed it out, muttering to himself. For the past hour, he'd been trying to find the right words to describe what he was feeling, but they eluded him. The words of the homeless veteran from earlier that day were still fresh in his mind. "People like you never had to struggle a day in your life." He hated how those words echoed, ricocheting through his head as if someone had struck a gong. Normally he'd brush off criticism like that with a snappy retort or dismiss it entirely. But this time, the veteran's tone carried something Trump couldn't shake: honesty. He pushed the notebook away and leaned back, his hands rubbing his temples. For the first time in decades, Trump felt like he had no mask to hide behind, no brand to uphold, and no wealth to buffer him from the opinions of others. What if he's right, Turker? Darkeru, bekwasado pusa sondakers or son, or you three breed. The next morning, he arrived at the fry stand with an uncharacteristic solemnity. As he set up for the day, the sights and sounds of the city seemed more vivid, more real. The squeak of a stroller wheel passing by, the laugh of a child chasing a ball on the sidewalk. It was all strangely humbling. When Maria arrived for her usual order, she noticed his quiet demeanor. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked, resting her cane against the counter. "Yeah, just, thinking," Trump replied, tossing a fresh batch of fries into the fryer. Maria chuckled softly. "That can be dangerous." Trump couldn't help but smirk. "Maybe. But it feels like the first time I've really done it in a while." Maria's eyes softened. She didn't pry but gave him a reassuring nod. Thinking's a good start. Later that afternoon, the veteran returned. This time he approached the stand without the same hostility. Trump, noticing him from a distance, straightened his back and braced for another verbal jab. But the veteran surprised him. "Got any fries left?" Trump nodded. "On the house," he said, grabbing a bag and scooping in a fresh batch. The man hesitated. "Why?" Trump looked him in the eye. "Because you were right," he said plainly. The man frowned, caught off guard. "Right about what?" "About me," Trump said, placing the bag on the counter. "About how I've spent most of my life not understanding what struggle really means." For a moment the veteran said nothing, his weathered face unreadable. Then he let out a dry chuckle. "Didn't expect you to say that." "Neither did I," Trump admitted. The two men stood there in silence for a beat. Finally, the veteran took the fries. "Thanks," he muttered before walking away. Trump watched him go, feeling a flicker of something unfamiliar. Relief. It wasn't the triumphant satisfaction of winning an argument or closing a deal. It was something quieter, something that came from admitting a hard truth. That night, he pulled out the dusty notebook from the corner of the stand. Sal had left it behind with his fry stand manual, but the last few pages were filled with little nuggets of wisdom. "Treat everyone like they matter, because they do," read one note in a wobbly hand. He smiled faintly, flipping the page. Beneath it was another. "Running a stand is about more than fries. It's about showing up for the people who count on you, even when you don't feel like it." The words felt oddly profound. He thought about the people he'd met so far, Maria with her patient advice, Jamal, full of determination despite his struggles, Mrs. Peterson, who never hesitated to point out his mistakes, but still came back every day, and the veteran. Trump felt something stirring, an idea, a sense of purpose that had been foreign to him for so long. He had spent years chasing big things, skyscrapers, casinos, gold-plated facades. But maybe the answer to his redemption was in the small, simple things. The fry stand wasn't just a job, it was a chance to reconnect with the world in a way he never had before. The next morning, Trump arrived early. He swept the area around the stand and scrubbed the counters until they gleamed. He added little touches, a chalkboard menu with clear prices, a jar of free candies for kids, and a sign that read, "Thank you for supporting a second chance." When Maria showed up, she noticed immediately. "What's all this?" she asked, pointing at the chalkboard. "Just trying to make this place feel more inviting," Trump said, handing her the usual fries. Maria smiled. "Looks like you're starting to care." Trump didn't deny it. "Maybe I am." For the rest of the day, he made an effort to talk to every customer, asking about their day, their kids, their work. Some still mocked him. He was a public figure, after all. But others seemed to notice the change. Slowly, the fry stand began to feel less like a job and more like a small community hub. By closing time, Trump was exhausted, but strangely content. He glanced at the handwritten note he'd posted at the corner of the stand. "Everyone deserves a second chance." It was a simple statement, but for Trump, it was the start of something far more profound. Donald Trump sat on his small couch, staring at his phone. For what felt like the 100th time, he opened the text message app, scrolled to Ivanka's name, and hovered his thumb over the keyboard. A blank text stared back at him, accusing in its emptiness. What could he say to her after all this time? "Hey, Ivanka, it's Dad. Just, wanted to check in." No. Too casual, she might not even reply. "Ivanka, I know I've made mistakes. Can we talk?" Better. But what if it came off as desperate? He sighed heavily, tossing the phone onto the cushion beside him. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure if jumping would mean falling or flying. For months now, their conversations had been perfunctory, cold, or non-existent. She had always been his closest confidant, his right hand, his heir in spirit and ambition. But that was before everything fell apart, before bankruptcy, before the scandals, before the shame. The next day, as he manned the fry stand, Trump mulled over his next steps. It was a slow afternoon, the lull giving him time to think. Maria arrived, her usual smile in place. "You're quieter today," she said, leaning on her cane. Trump handed her a fresh bag of fries, shrugging. "I've got a lot on my mind." "Something you want to share?" Maria asked gently. He hesitated. He had never been the type to talk about his feelings, especially not with strangers, or what Maria had been at least when they first met, but now she felt like a lifeline in this strange new chapter of his life. "I'm trying to reach out to my daughter," Trump admitted, his voice quieter than usual. Maria gave him a long look, her eyes softening. "Well, that's a good thing. Have you told her what you want to say?" "I'm trying, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "What if she doesn't want to hear from me? What if I'm just too late?" Maria reached across the counter, resting her hand lightly on his. "It's never too late to try, Mr. Trump. Families can be messy, but at the end of the day, love has a way of pulling through. You just have to take that first step." That night, spurred on by Maria's words, Trump sat at the table, pen and paper in hand. Text messages felt too impersonal, and calling seemed too direct. So he decided to write a letter. He started slowly, the words awkward at first. "Dear Ivanka, I know it's been a while since we really talked." The sentences began to flow as he poured his heart out, confessing his regrets, acknowledging his mistakes, and most importantly, asking for a chance to rebuild their relationship. He didn't make excuses or blame anyone but himself. By the time he finished, the letter stretched across 3 pages. He read it over twice before folding it carefully and slipping it into an envelope. The next morning, he mailed it before heading to the stand. Days passed without a response. Each time his phone buzzed, he felt a jolt of hope, only to feel deflated when it wasn't from Ivanka. The waiting gnawed at him, but he didn't let it distract him from his growing connection with the locals. Jamal stopped by frequently, always chatting about his family or cracking jokes. Trump started slipping him extra fries, much to Jamal's mock indignation. "Man, you're going to make me gain weight before I even get out of this neighborhood," Jamal said with a grin one day. "Considerate payment for the life advice you keep giving me," Trump replied dryly, though the faint smile on his lips betrayed his gratitude. Mrs. Peterson had taken to sitting at a nearby bench, doing her crossword puzzles, while occasionally chiming in with unsolicited advice about business and life. "If you want people to come back," she said one afternoon, "you should offer something they can't get anywhere else, besides you being here, of course." "Like what?" Trump asked, genuinely curious. She thought for a moment before tapping her pencil on the table. "Kindness. That'll keep them coming." Then one evening, as Trump was locking up the stand, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and froze, a message from Ivanka. "Got your letter, can we talk tomorrow?" Trump stared at the screen, his chest tight with a mix of relief and apprehension. After a moment, he typed back, "Yes. Let me know. When?" The next day, Ivanka arrived at the fry stand just after lunch. She wore a tailored coat, her hair immaculately styled, but her expression was guarded. Trump stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a towel. "Thanks for coming," he said. Ivanka looked around, her eyes taking in the chalkboard menu, the jar of candies, the line of regulars chatting nearby. "I almost didn't believe it when I heard you were doing this," she said. "A fry stand, Dad?" Trump nodded. "Yeah, a fry stand. Funny where life takes you, isn't it?" She didn't laugh, but softened slightly. "I got your letter. I wasn't sure what to think. You've never senti wanderer. Mesma Sursakika." Plot apologized like that before. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. "I've spent a long time pretending I didn't need to. But I do. I messed up, Ivanka. More ways than I can count. And I know saying sorry isn't enough. But I want to try. If you'll let me." For a moment, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped closer and hugged him. It was brief, but enough. "Let's see how this goes," she said quietly. "But you got a lot of work to do." "I know," Trump replied, his voice steady. "And I'm ready to do it." From that day on, the fry stand wasn't just a place to reconnect with strangers. It became a bridge to reconnect with his family. Ivanka stopped by occasionally, bringing the kids who marveled at the free candy and begged their grandfather to let them help. Trump, for the first time in years, started to feel like part of their lives again. And slowly, with each small step, the distance between them began to close. The fry stand had come a long way since the day Donald Trump first took it over. What once felt like a desperate, demeaning fallback had evolved into something unexpected, a source of pride. Now standing behind the counter in his apron and hat, Trump no longer felt like he was running away from failure. Instead, he felt like he was building something meaningful. But Donald, being Donald, he couldn't completely ignore his business instincts. The stand was doing well enough to stay afloat, but just getting by had never been his style. And while he didn't have the resources to think big, he realized that the fry stand wasn't just about selling fries, it could be so much more. That realization came into sharper focus one bright Saturday morning. Maria shuffled to the counter, her usual warmth shining through despite the chill in the air. "You've made this place livelier, you know," she said, gesturing to the growing line of regulars behind her. "Thanks," Trump replied, handing her a fresh bag of fries. "But I was thinking it could be more welcoming." Maria tilted her head. "You mean more than free candy for the kids?" He nodded. "Yeah. Something to really bring people together. I just haven't figured out what yet." Maria tapped her cane thoughtfully. "People have two things: good food and good company. You've got the first part down. Maybe the second is where you focus." Her words stuck with him. A few days later, inspiration struck. He remembered a block party from his childhood. A vibrant, joyful event where neighbors laughed, kids played, and strangers became friends. That sense of connection felt like the perfect thing to bring to his little corner of Queens. The next morning, Trump showed up at the stand armed with a stack of flyers he had handwritten late into the night. Trump's Community Night. Free fries for kids, music, and games. Saturday, 5 p.m. All are welcome. "Trump, this looks handwritten," Jamal joked when he stopped by the stand. "What happened to the whole big brand mogul thing?" Trump chuckled. "Big brand moguls don't usually own fry stands, Jamal. It's time for a new approach." "Hey, I respect it," Jamal said, taking a flyer to show his family. The lead-up to Community Night turned the fry stand into a hive of activity. Trump worked harder than he had in years, stringing up lights around the stand, arranging tables and chairs borrowed from Mrs. Peterson, and even recruiting Jamal to bring his Bluetooth speaker for music. Ivanka heard about the event during one of her visits and offered to bring cookies for the kids. Her willingness to help felt like another small victory. By Saturday afternoon, everything was set. Trump surveyed the area with a mix of nerves and excitement. The little stretch of pavement next to the stand had been transformed, strings of lights twinkled overhead, tables were decorated with checkered cloths, and a big hand-painted banner proudly read, "Second Chances, Golden Fries." As 5 p.m. rolled around, people began to arrive, families, singles, elderly couples, more than Trump had expected. Maria sat with Mrs. Peterson at a table near the front, chatting happily while munching on fries. Jamal's music brought energy to the scene, and Ivanka stood by her father's side, passing out her cookies with the same charm that had once made her a star at business galas. For a moment, Trump just stood there, taking it all in. "Not bad," Ivanka said, nudging him. "Not bad at all," he replied with a small smile. The night unfolded better than Trump had hoped. A group of local teens organized an impromptu dance-off by the music speaker. A few kids set up a lemonade stand nearby, calling it Partnered with Trump's Fries. Even the homeless veteran who had confronted Trump weeks earlier showed up, sharing stories with others over steaming bags of fries. Trump moved through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing at jokes and genuinely listening to people's stories. "Who would have thought," he murmured to himself at one point, watching two strangers bond over a shared memory of growing up in Queens. The highlight of the night came when Maria, buoyed by the atmosphere, leaned on her cane and told a story about her late husband, who used to grill burgers at family cookouts. Her voice cracked with emotion, but the applause that followed left her beaming. By the end of the evening, Trump was exhausted but happy in a way he hadn't been in years. The event had done more than bring the community together. It had brought him closer to understanding what he had been missing all along. "You did good, Dad," Ivanka said as they packed up the tables. Her words carried a weight that went deeper than approval. They felt like the beginning of forgiveness. For the first time in a long time, Donald Trump wasn't chasing something unattainable. He was simply present, surrounded by people who mattered. And that, he realized, was enough. The next morning, as the sunlight spilled onto the pavement, Donald Trump unlocked the fry stand and felt a new energy in the air. Community night had been a bigger success than he imagined. People stopped by throughout the day, their faces alight with genuine smiles, their words no longer just orders for fries, but exchanges, filled with connection and gratitude. "Morning, Mr. Trump," a young girl called out as she skipped past with her mom. "Morning." Trump waved back, surprised at how natural it felt. Queens, once a backdrop to his unexpected fall from grace, was becoming a home he never knew he needed. And something even stranger had begun to happen. He genuinely wanted to give back to these people who had unknowingly welcomed him into their lives. Later that afternoon, Jamal showed up, his ever-present grin in place. "Hey, I thought I'd check in," Jamal said, leaning casually on the counter. "You got a sec?" Trump nodded. Jamal rarely opened up about his personal life unless prompted, but Trump had started noticing signs, a tiredness in his smile, a quietness that didn't suit him. "Everything okay?" Trump asked. Jamal hesitated before sighing. "Not really. My little sister's got this thing at school, a fee for her after-school program, and I don't have the money for it right now. I've been thinking of picking up a third job." Trump felt a pang of guilt. Here was a young man doing everything he could for his family, while Trump had spent years fixated on opulence. It was a stark reminder of how far apart their worlds once were. Without overthinking it, Trump reached into the cash drawer and pulled out a few bills. "Here," he said, extending the money toward Jamal. Jamal's eyes widened. Whoa, Mr. Trump, I can't take that." "Think of it as an investment," Trump said. "Your sister's future is important, right? Let this take care of it so you don't burn yourself out." Jamal hesitated, but finally accepted, muttering a heartfelt, "Thanks, man. This means a lot." "Don't mention it," Trump said with a wave. But as Jamal walked away, something inside him shifted. The gesture wasn't grand by his old standards, but it felt good, honest even. The fry stand continued to be a hub for small but impactful moments like this. Mrs. Peterson started bringing her grandson, a shy kid with thick glasses who would sit quietly with a coloring book while his grandmother ate her fries. One day, Trump knelt by the boy's side. "You like coloring?" he asked, watching as the boy carefully filled in a picture of a train. The boy nodded. Trump thought for a moment before disappearing into the back of the stand. A few minutes later, he returned with a stack of blank paper and a pack of colored pencils he'd picked up on a whim from a nearby store. "Here," he said, sliding them across the table. "Consider this your official fry stand artist kit." The boy's face lit up, and for the first time, he spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Trump." Mrs. Peterson beamed, her voice warm as she said, "You've got a good heart, whether you admit it or not." Perhaps the most transformative moment came one late afternoon when Trump spotted the homeless veteran he had clashed with months before. The man, grizzled and weary, stood at a distance watching the stand with a guarded expression. Trump decided to approach. "Hey," he said, offering a cautious smile. The man crossed his arms. "What do you want?" "I wanted to say I'm sorry," Trump began, his voice genuine, "for how I acted when we first met. You were right. I was out of touch, and I didn't understand what it's like to struggle like you have." The veteran's eyes narrowed as if searching for deception, but when none appeared, he relaxed slightly. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong," he said after a pause. "Come on," Trump said, gesturing toward the stand. "Let me get you some fries. On the house." The veteran hesitated but eventually followed. As they sat down together, sharing stories about their vastly different lives, an unexpected camaraderie formed. By the end of the conversation, the veteran had agreed to return to help out at the stand in exchange for meals and some spare cash. "You ever think you'd be running a fry stand instead of towers?" the veteran asked with a sly grin. "Not in a million years," Trump replied, laughing. Days turned into weeks, and the small acts of kindness began to add up. Trump started offering free fries to kids after school. He left baskets of food at the local shelter. He even donated to Maria's church fundraiser, much to her delight. Slowly but surely, the fry stand wasn't just a place to grab food. It became a space where people felt valued. It was a small, quiet revolution, one gesture at a time. One evening, as the sun set and the day wound down, Trump leaned against the counter and looked at the scene around him. Kids laughing, locals chatting, and a sense of community buzzing in the air. For the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't miss the skyscrapers or the boardrooms. This, he thought to himself, is what real success looks like. The cool autumn air swept through Queens as Donald Trump stood behind the fry stand, flipping a basket of golden fries with practiced ease. The little stand had grown into something special, a hub for warmth, conversation, and belonging. Yet, as much as he had found connection in the community, there was a deeper void he couldn't ignore. Ivanka had been visiting more often, her words kinder, her eyes softer. But there was still a distance, an unspoken ache lingering between them, a chasm too wide to cross easily. And then there were her children, Trump's grandchildren. They rarely came, a clear sign of the hurt that ran through their family. This weighed on him one crisp afternoon, when a simple email changed everything. It was a Saturday morning when he checked his phone, sipping coffee before opening the stand. Among the usual junk and a couple of business-related messages was an email with the subject, "Bringing the kids to the stand today." It was from Ivanka. For a moment, Trump froze, rereading the short note. His heart skipped as he imagined seeing his grandchildren laughing, playing, eating fries. But also, he dreaded it. What if they still carried the anger and disappointment that Ivanka had worked so hard to suppress? By noon, Trump was fidgeting. Every chair at the fry stand was in perfect position, every table wiped down to a shine. He had carefully stocked his fry station, even adding some new toppings, an idea inspired by a local teen who joked that gourmet fries are all the rage. When he spotted Ivanka's car pulling up, his palms grew clammy. He quickly removed his apron and straightened his shirt, looking every bit the man who wanted to impress. The door opened, and there they were, Ivanka holding her youngest daughter's hand while the older two bounced out, craning their necks to look around. "Papa," the youngest shouted, spotting Trump. His heart melted at the sound. He crouched down as she ran toward him, her tiny arms wrapping around his neck. "Hi, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ivanka smiled, but the older two hung back, unsure of what to do. Trump straightened up and walked toward them cautiously. "Hey, kids," he said gently. They exchanged a glance, the kind only siblings understood, before the older boy asked, "So you own this fry stand now?" Trump grinned. "Yep. Want to see how it works?" For the next hour, Trump gave his grandchildren the grand tour, showing them how to fry the perfect batch, season them just right, and handle the bustling line of customers. Slowly, their hesitation melted away. "These fries are amazing," his granddaughter declared, her cheeks puffed with food. "Best in Queens," Trump said proudly, earning a laugh. The moment of truth came later, after Ivanka sent the kids to play in the nearby park with a few other children. The stand had quieted down, and she stood by the counter, her arms crossed, watching her father wipe down trays. "You've changed," she said abruptly, breaking the silence. Trump paused mid-swipe, looking up. "I'd like to think so." "Why now?" she asked. her tone neither angry nor accusatory, just curious. Why not years ago, when we needed it most? He leaned against the counter, exhaling deeply. I think I was too busy, chasing the wrong things. Money, power, attention, they all felt like they'd make me happy. But they never did. Ivanka nodded slowly, her gaze searching his face. And now? Now, he said softly. I'm just trying to fix what I broke. Starting with you. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she reached across the counter, resting her hand on his. I see that, Dad, and I'm proud of you for trying. It wasn't everything. The past couldn't be erased in a single conversation. But it was a start, and that was more than Trump had dared to hope for. The fry stand took on a new kind of joy whenever Ivanka brought her kids. They helped with small tasks, laughing and arguing like siblings do. The youngest often declared herself queen of French fries, delighting customers with her bossy yet adorable demeanor. One day, as the sun set and the children packed up their crayons and toys, Ivanka turned to her father. You've done something special here, she said, motioning to the bustling stand and the happy faces surrounding it. Not just me, Trump admitted, thinking of Maria, Jamal, Mrs. Peterson, and all the others who had played a role. It's a team effort, she smiled. You know, we never saw you as much of a team player before. Trump laughed. Neither did I. They shared a rare moment of silence, watching as the community buzzed around them. A mix of families, locals, and friends who had all found something they needed in that little corner of Queens. I'll bring the kids again next week, Ivanka said, turning toward her car. They love it here. Trump watched her go, a warmth spreading through his chest. The road to redemption was far from over, but every step forward felt like a miracle. As the lights of the fry stand flickered on, he realized he wasn't just selling fries. He was earning back the trust and love of those who mattered most. One lazy Wednesday afternoon, as the steady hum of customers came and went, a young woman named Natalie approached the fry stand. With her oversized glasses, camera slung around her neck, and a notepad in hand, she looked more like a college student working on a project than someone craving fries. Excuse me, she said, her voice bright but nervous. Are you the owner here? Trump glanced up, setting down a fry basket. That'd be me. Natalie smiled. I'm Natalie Cohen, a freelance writer. A friend told me about this place. About how it's run by you. The Donald Trump. He winced slightly at how she emphasized the word. That's right, nah. I'd love to do a story about it, she said eagerly. About what led you here and the community you've built around this little fry stand. Trump hesitated. The last thing he wanted was more public attention. His days of dominating headlines hadn't exactly left people with warm memories. What kind of story? He asked cautiously. An honest one, Natalie replied, sensing his wariness. Not a takedown or anything sensational, just your journey. Trump considered it. He glanced at the growing line of people and the neighbors who had become his friends. The fry stand wasn't just his story anymore. It was theirs, too. All right, he finally see now turned cousin Said. Besides your no flashy headlines, just fries and real people. Natalie spent the next 2 days shadowing Trump, snapping candid photos and chatting with customers. She interviewed Maria, who sang praises about how Trump helped her through a tough winter. She spoke with Jamal, who highlighted how Trump supported his family in small but impactful ways. Even Mrs. Peterson shared anecdotes about how the fry stand had given her grandson a newfound confidence. This place isn't just a fry stand, Natalie told Trump as they wrapped up her visit. It's a second chance for you and for this community. He nodded thoughtfully. That's the idea. A week later, Natalie published her article online, titled, From Skyscrapers to Small Fries, the former president who rebuilt his life at a fry stand. The article went viral overnight. News outlets picked it up, initially framing it as a quirky human interest piece. Headlines ranged from Donald Trump reinvents himself in Queens to From President to Fries. The most surprising redemption story of the year. Reporters and TV crews started showing up, eager to turn Trump's story into the latest sensation. At first, Trump wanted nothing to do with him. "I didn't rebuild my life just to be a sideshow," he told Jamal. But the attention brought more customers, many of whom came not out of curiosity, but because they were inspired by what the fry stand represented: hope, resilience, and community. One day, a woman approached the stand with her teenage daughter. She hesitated before speaking. "My husband and I didn't vote for you," she said bluntly. "I didn't agree with a lot of what you did back then." Trump raised an eyebrow, unsure where this was going. "But I read that article," she continued. "And you've changed. You've done something good here. I just wanted to say that." "Thank you," Trump replied, genuinely moved. She nodded, her daughter smiling as she walked away with a bag of fries. Despite the positive attention, not everyone welcomed the redemption arc. Online debates raged about whether Trump truly deserved a second chance or if it was all a calculated act. Some people came to the stand solely to confront him, demanding answers about his past decisions. "You think selling fries erases everything?" a man asked bitterly one afternoon. Trump sighed, looking the man in the eye. "It doesn't, but it's a start. I can't change what I did, but I can try to be better now." The man said nothing and left without ordering, but his words lingered. Trump knew he'd never fully escape his past, and maybe that was fair. Redemption wasn't about erasure. It was about growth. The increased attention reached Ivanka, who called her father one evening. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "You know they'll pick you apart, Dad." "I'm not doing it for them," Trump replied simply. "I'm doing it for us, for this community." She paused before saying softly, "I'm proud of you, Dad." Months passed, and the fry stand continued to flourish. Customers arrived not just for the fries, but for the connection they felt in that little corner of Queens. Trump remained steadfast, brushing off sensationalized headlines and focusing instead on the people who came through his line every day. The story was no longer about Donald Trump, the man who fell from grace. It was about the unlikely family he had found in Queens, a story of second chances, humility, and kindness. As the cameras faded and the viral moment passed, Trump stayed exactly where he wanted to be. In his apron, behind the fry stand, building something meaningful, one order at a time. It was a crisp winter evening, and a light snow had begun to dust the streets of Queens. The fry stand glowed warmly under its modest string lights, a beacon of comfort for locals braving the cold. Inside, Donald Trump wiped the counter one last time for the day, his breath visible in the chilly air. A small group of regulars gathered by the tables, laughing and chatting over warm fries. Among them were Maria, Jamal, Mrs. Peterson, and the veteran who now worked at the stand part-time. Each person represented a thread in the tightly woven community Trump had helped build. "All right, folks," he called out. "I'm closing up shop soon. Grab your last fries now, or you'll have to wait until tomorrow." Maria chuckled, standing to pull on her coat. "Always kicking us out, Donald. You're too good at this tough love thing." "Someone's got to keep you in line," Trump shot back with a grin. As the last of the customers trickled out, Trump locked the fry stand's door and turned to find Ivanka waiting at one of the tables, her children bundled in scarves and gloves. The sight brought a warmth to his chest that no heater could replicate. "Sticking around for closing time?" he asked, slipping off his apron. "Actually, we came to celebrate something," Ivanka said, her smile soft and full of pride. His eyebrows furrowed. "Celebrate what?" His eldest grandson held up a paper he had been hiding. "This." Trump leaned in, squinting at the document. It was a small certificate declaring the stand as a recipient of a local community award. The Heart of Queens, honoring businesses that give back. "For me?" Trump asked, his voice tinged with surprise. Ivanka nodded. "For, you, Dad. It is from the neighborhood committee. They say this place has done more for Queens than they could have imagined." For a moment he was speechless. Well," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. "I couldn't have done any of this without you all, without them." He gestured toward the door, thinking of the people who had supported him along the way. "You earned it, Papa," his youngest granddaughter said, tugging at his sleeve. As they sat together that evening, sharing fries and stories, Trump found himself reflecting on his journey. Just a year ago, he had been lost, estranged from his family, shunned by the world, clinging to a fading image of the man he used to be. The fry stand hadn't just been a lifeline, it had been a teacher, humbling him in ways he never thought possible. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to figure out what matters," Trump said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Ivanka reached over and took his hand. "And you found it, Dad. You really did." Later that night, after Ivanka and the kids had gone home, Trump stayed behind at the stand, staring out the frosted window. The neighborhood was quiet now, the glow of streetlights reflecting off the snow. He thought about everything, the skyscrapers and power that used to define him, the humiliating fall from grace, and the unexpected redemption he'd found here. For the first time in his life, he felt something he hadn't realized he was missing. Peace. A soft knock on the window broke his thoughts. It was Jamal, holding up a coffee in one hand and a smile in the other. "You gonna sit in there all night, Mr. Trump, or do I gotta drag you home?" Trump chuckled, grabbing his coat. As he stepped outside, he glanced back at the stand one last time. The lights flickered softly, the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling around it like a blanket. "You coming?" Jamal called, already halfway down the block. "Yeah," Trump replied, letting the door lock behind him. "I'm coming." The story of Trump's golden fries had ended not with a roaring crowd or monumental success, but with something far greater: connection, humility, and love. The man who once built towers to the sky had found his legacy in the small golden fries shared among neighbors, family, and friends. And as he walked down the snowy streets of Queens, his laughter joining the crisp winter air, Donald Trump knew one thing for certain: he had finally come home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe Storyboat for daily heartwarming stories like this. Also, what should be our next topic? Let us know in comment section.